Hi, I'm Nathan. I go by Peteparker, and every week I do comic book reviews because that's the rule at my house. If I want to keep buying them, I gotta review them. So this review is going to be about Invincible Iron Man number 505, I believe, which is very interesting. I read 504 in the store, but I didn't actually buy it until this time. So when I flipped through 505, I decided that I've really enjoyed the last part of the story so much, and the art is so good that it was worth buying both parts of the story and reading the whole thing through. So in this review, you'll get a little bit of 504 also along with 505, but it's mainly going to be focused on 505. So this is written by Matt Fraction and drawn by Salvador Larroca. And let's talk about the story a little bit. So Iron Man goes to investigate Paris, where another one of the hammers has fallen for fear itself. And the person who found this hammer was the Grey Gargoyle, who was just hanging out over there. And his powers are like completely intensified, and there's no inkling that he's still in there. So it seems like the person who took over the Grey Gargoyle has completely taken him over and increased his powers 1,000-fold or whatever. And the majority of France, all the people and their things, have been turned to stone and slightly destroyed. It seems like there's been pockets of people who haven't seen the Grey Gargoyle, but anybody who sees him directly with their eyes instantly turns into stone. And so one of the reasons that I didn't actually buy 504 to start with is the very end scene of that book, where Tony Stark is finally thrown. First he's smashed by the big Grey Gargoyle guy, and then he's thrown, and he wakes up on a gigantic mountain of bodies, and he says these are all bodies. Now if you look at the scope of this, that's like a chapel that's probably, I don't know, estimate 12 stories high, maybe less than that. But anyway, these are giant mountains of people who also go into the water and provide enough leverage. Look at the size of him compared to everybody else. Now that's a ridiculous amount of people all piled into the same spot and slightly smashed up. The time it would take for this Grey Gargoyle guy to single out all the bodies and throw them onto a pile and let them just, break or whatever while throwing them onto a pile, that would equate that height is just astronomical. It's completely ridiculous why this would happen. And unless it was some kind of magic thing where he's been scooping them from wherever they were and setting them in a pile somewhere. But anyway, the whole idea is just completely ridiculous. Now, I get the point. The point is to show that these aren't just statues that he's smashing through, but it's actual people who have been killed or can't be converted now because they're destroyed as a statue. So that's kind of a huge impact. And the joke is that that Mr. Fraction does not care for France very much, because that's a lot of dead people in France. So in 505, we start out with the flashback of Tony thinking about his father, who was trying to engineer a new kind of neutron bomb at the time that would wipe out only people and leave all the infrastructure intact for the military, so that only the biological people suffered. And then he wakes up on that giant pile again, and the Grey Gargoyle's after him again, and they're shooting each other and throwing each other through buildings and stuff, and Tony's really getting his ass handed to him, more or less. And in the midst of this, there's a flashback to right before this happened. Oh, in the last issue. In the last issue, Tony specifically, before he took off to Paris, specifically asked Pepper to hire this other redheaded chick as his security liaison, or head of security for all of his family and his friends and his business, and she runs everything to do with security altogether. And she agrees and accepts it and shows up while Tony's getting his butt kicked, and finds out that she's the only person who's being paid only in stock options. So she's essentially doing it for free because the company's not worth anything yet. But once the company becomes worth something, then she'll get kind of back paid. And she was kind of told when she was hired that everyone was paid in stock options and nobody's actually paid. But it turns out that she's the only one not being paid, and it was Pepper that was the one that told her that. So it's starting the suspicion of, why is this chick on my case or whatever. And anyway, here's a really good panel of the Gray Gargoyle's face. The cool thing about that is he's got this huge, heavy biker mustache, whereas the regular Gray Gargoyle has his own like little pencil thin French kind of looking mustache. So I thought that was pretty awesome and funny too, that the mustache would even gain power as the character gained power in general. So then they're fighting, and somebody pops up out of nowhere and tries to help Tony, and it's Detroit Steel here. I vaguely knew of that character, but don't really care about him all that much. And he really seems to help Tony out there for a second. It seems like a lot of his weapons are really hurting this Gray Gargoyle guy, whereas a lot of Tony's weapons weren't working at all. So then the Gray Gargoyle turns his focus onto Detroit Steel and rips apart his whole suit and turns him to stone. And right as he turned him to stone, Tony Stark uses this little blade thing right here on his hands. He channels his repulsor into kind of a sword and slices the Gray Gargoyle through the head. And which really hurts him, surprising, right? Because after all the repulsor stuff that he's been doing this whole time, he had this huge setup that I'll show you here, which I couldn't really understand what this picture was at first, but I eventually got it right there. It's like an expanded version of his gauntlets or whatever, with a bunch of different repulsor stuff put together so he can do one giant repulsor blast or whatever, which I thought was cool, but you'd think that'd be more powerful than this little sword thing. But apparently the sword thing really hurt the Gray Gargoyle, and he killed the Detroit Steel guy by smashing his statue or whatever, and then deals Tony a huge blow to the stomach, which cracks his little thing, his arc reactor or whatever. So Tony books it out of there. He's had enough. So they're both kind of hurt, but it doesn't show that anything's over. And then you get kind of a scene where Pepper Potts is crying in her room with her armor on, her rescue armor, about how the world is going crazy and people are fighting each other and there's looting and stuff. But that whole scene, like that whole focus part, seems really like forced and kind of out of place in the story. But the security chick comes in and tries to console her a little bit, and then Tony shows up after he had gotten some spare parts, and they see how bad he is, and he takes off with the spare parts ready to go fix himself and tell the Avengers that he couldn't do anything in Paris, and that they're in trouble, more or less. So that's generally the story. I did like it more than I thought I would. I mean, the art by itself is a huge pull, is the huge reason why I'm into it. Tony's suit looks awesome. The Gray Gargoyle looks awesome. Their fights, you can you can really tell what's happening in it, and you can almost feel like how huge these hammer blows are with this giant mystical hammer straight to Tony's chest over and over and over. But those are the main reasons why I bought the book. And, I generally like the Paris story altogether, but since he's not in Paris anymore, and I don't think he's going back, it'll be interesting to see where this goes from here and how this is actually ever solved. I was trying to look for another picture that you might enjoy, but I think I showed them all already. So yeah, it's worth the money, I think. I think the art alone is worth the money, and I think it's a better story than most, so I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5, but that's the combined story altogether so far, so you really have to buy this one too and read them together to really get it. On its own, this is probably the better of the two issues because you get more of the fight scene between the two characters and less of the ridiculousness of a giant pile of bodies or whatever. But if you like seeing Tony Stark fight something mystical that's made of stone, it's pretty cool. And there's a quote in here about how the Grey Gargoyle sounds like old, wet, oiled stones moving together. It really brought me like into the scene and made me think of what that sounded like, somebody coming towards me. It was really cool. I think it was in 504. But there you go. 4 out of 5. Invincible Iron Man, Fear Itself. It's pretty good. It's one of the better Fear Itself tie-ins, if not the best one out there. I'd have to really think about it to decide if it was the best one, but I think it might be. So there you go. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.